All right, we're back. What's up, everybody? My name is Sunny Ray. This is the Sunny Ray Show. I've got Jonathan back here for round two. Jonathan, how you doing today?
Very good. How are you doing, Sonny?
I am well. I am well. Hey, before I kind of like dive into my questions, by the way, we did an interview last week, so I'll try and attach that, to the bottom of the interview so that people get a bit more context. If they want to, hear what Jonathan said last time, they can do so. But today we wanted to, I guess, go into the deep end, right? A little bit. Do you want to maybe level set or give us a bit of a framing around today's conversation and where you'd like for us to go?
Sure. You know, there's been a lot of thinking about the sort of long term, slow moving 50-year crisis of climate change, and where we actually have a short term heat problem that's, in, close to intractable, requires a lot of innovation in a short time, is with data centers and with managing the heat that comes from hyperscale data centers and the new generation of chips. And that's now, it's gone from less than 10 or 15% of the electric spend for data centers up to 40 to 60% in many of the new data centers. And so this is a barrier that is constraining the growth of AI, not just in the United States, but all over the world. And air doesn't have the heat capacity to fix it. So people are moving to liquid solutions. Even though water is bad for electronics, they're using other liquids. So there's a lot of creativity that's coming online to address this sort of the cooling crisis that's happening inside of these buildings, inside of these chips, and inside the whole energy system that's grappling, with this massive AI 5G robotics load that's coming up. And so
So
that's
you said,
and those solutions companies are the companies we're bringing investors to.
gotcha. You said something to me before this call that I wanted to start with. So you said renewables didn't protect China or the EU, right? When Hormuz got threatened, they still
Yeah.
needed oil products. Unpack that. What did people who built the renewable narratives miss?
Well, first of all, it's been a very successful narrative. The idea that renewables will protect you from oil price shocks. It's but what they I mean, among the things they missed is that most oil is not used for generating electricity, and so it's not really a substitute. Most oil is used either for generating heat, uh, or it's used for making materials, including things like the various parts that hold solar and wind together, and all of the lubricants inside of them. So essentially, the economy of China, as well as other countries, really needs that oil for all those other purposes. And so mistaking electricity, which is maybe roughly a third of it of oil use, for all of the uses of oil, for the full 100%, is sort of missing the 65% of the oil applications out there. And I guess the other thing that it misses is sort of the quality of heat and quality of electricity that you get. And so you can think about it this way: there are no facilities in China where people are using solar to make polysilicon and other uh, parts of the solar value chain. So it can be a component, but it is not a substitute uh, for the type of fuel you need to do sort of high temperature chemical processing. So far, with today's technology. And so that was missed by a lot of people because the narrative is very compelling. Let's get off of this old-fashioned oil, and uh, but but the economy, doesn't run just on electricity, and all of those high performance materials that are used in computers and airplanes, require, other types of materials that come from oil. So that's why China and Asian countries like Korea and Japan are really affected much more, than say the US or Brazil.
So China has more solar and EVs than anyone, right? So what's like the failure mode you're pointing at?
Well, it still makes sense. China has more coal than all other countries in the world combined, and that is growing faster than the rest of the world combined. So if you have a lot of cheap coal electricity and relatively cheap hydro, it makes a lot of sense for you to save the oil for manufacturing, for that 1/3 that isn't even covered, and to use the electricity to um, to allow your citizens to go around, uh, and going from charge station to charge station with, with surveillance, but to essentially husband your necessary material resources for manufacturing, so you can keep those people employed and have a manufacturing economy. So all those, let's pretend this blockade extends to Chinese ships for another 3 months. There will be a lot of businesses that will go under, and that's a risk that's probably unacceptable to the leadership of China. And you can substitute for transportation. You can substitute with electric cars, as you know, but you can't substitute electricity for making high performance materials that are in that car.
Hey Jonathan, I think you're outside, so there's a bit of wind that I'm picking up on the audio. I'm not
Oh,
sure if there's a way to error correct there a little bit, but
I
if
thought I
possible.
thought I thought our noise cancellation should get it, but let me. Would you
Do you
like
have
me to?
your headphone thingies, like the little
No, I don't
iPods?
know.
No.
Oh, I don't. But let me. I can move inside if you're willing to. If you're willing to hold on for a second, I can move
Sure, yeah,
inside.
I can hold. Sure.
Okay, so let me just see. Can you turn my video off from where you are? Oh, here it is. I got it. There you go. Okay. Okay.
Oh,
How's that?
nice. No more wind. Yes.
Sorry about that. I thought I would be creative and go outside. We had a sort of a windy day. A cool windy day is exciting in San Diego.
Hey, so you've been in, sustainable finance since 1999, right? So what's the most expensive narrative the climate finance industry got wrong, and who paid for it?
Oh my God, that's a tough one. I would say, I would say green hydrogen is probably one of one of the most egregious ones, because you ended up using more natural gas to make the hydrogen, than if you just use the natural gas at first. And a lot of countries devoted billions, including the U.S. and Norway. And I still remember Norway's representative saying, we're not going to talk about economics on this. This is a matter of government, priority. It is not a economic bet. But I would say that was a big one. And I would say, the the effort the effort to stymie natural gas in the United States after natural gas allowed the U.S. to decarbonize faster than the rest of the world, including Europe, was a strategic mistake by the U.S. environmental community, because that really helped clean the air near all these power plants, and it also plays into the U.S.'s strength in producing natural gas, and it has been essentially being rediscovered by all the green hyperscalers now, and is the fuel of choice for for all of essentially all the incremental AI.
When you say green hydrogen, do you mean like hydrogen fuel cells and things like that? Like the whole
Well,
movement
fuel
way back
cells.
in the
I mean,
day?
fuel cells. But the idea that you can, so there's like there is a global price for hydrogen. There's basically two hubs, and one in Houston and one in Amsterdam, and the idea that you can make hydrogen by electrolyzing water, that's called green hydrogen,
Hmm.
and that costs roughly 10 times more. And so there have been a lot of startups that have said that they can break that, and
Interesting.
they've received a tremendous. Actually, I mean, Canada has, if you think about the company that's probably made the most, I would say, I mean, Ballard Power. I've had a few acquaintances that have worked there over the years, but they've, received a tremendous amount of money over time to
Have you ever
develop that.
have you ever heard of a company called Hydrogenics?
I don't know them,
So
but
when I started my career,
yeah,
I'm going to share my LinkedIn profile.
okay.
2000, my first job ever as an
Oh,
electrical
look at that,
engineer was working for
industrial
Hydrogenics.
hydrogen.
Yeah, and they were literally they were the fastest growing company in Canada, according to,
Oh,
what is it,
wow, that's great.
fast, one of those magazines, and yeah, and I worked on fuel cells, so it was quite interesting. Hey, let's keep going. I was going to
I
ask
like
you, so
fuel cell. By the way, I like fuel cells. They have a role to play in terms of, protecting air quality and getting hyperscale data centers approved in places where it's politically unpalatable. But they really do run on natural gas, and that's
right, yeah, yeah,
you
yeah, no,
know.
I get
But
it. That's
I'm just sort of a realist and a pragmatist about it, and they don't really run on electrolyzed water, and you know.
Yep. I know all about it. But hey, so before all of this, right? So we talked about this in our last interview: Tesla at $16, Sun Edison, the Montreal Protocol. So there's a pattern, right? Oh, by the way, I have a co-host who's like just dying to be a part of this show right now.
Uh,
So he does unfortunately crash the show once in a while. Anyway, so I was going to ask you, so what's the like you keep showing up early to the right energy bet, right? So what are you actually looking at when you make those calls?
I would say what I'm really looking at, I think a part of it is just putting together pieces that already exist and trying to see what's consistent with them and what's inconsistent. And so when someone claims that they have a perpetual motion machine, but you think that the energy has to come from somewhere, if you're compressing hydrogen and you realize, hey, you compress it, you lose 30% there, you uncompress it, decompress it, you lose 30% there, you don't really have 100 units. And so I would say it's a combination of math. I think math is not always used because there's a lot of political geometry to clean tech financing, where you get your language into the bill. If you are a developer of some technology, you get it covered. And so, like, let's look at energy storage and lithium batteries. Well, they have some safety problems. We've had explosions and fires in the United States, and obviously around the world, transportation, it's happened. But they managed to get in and get treated as a renewable energy resource, even though energy is lost every single cycle of every single battery, and they have fire problems. And so part of it is sort of relying on the government to get it right in terms of making the right energy bets and not really analyzing it independently. And so I think independence is helpful.
Hey, and you're a best in class investor, right? So you held
Yeah,
Exxon, you held Boeing,
yeah, sure.
and the SRI crowd probably hated you for it, right? So why was that the right call, and is it still the right call?
Well, this what I usually tell people in the SRI crowd, and some of them, are friends, is that, hey, you flew from London for this meeting. I mean, there was, you may as well have have the oil be produced by the most efficient producers in the universe and the ones that are able to manage your residuals best, and the ones that actually, and that is a real environmental advantage. And that's where a lot of the big environmental gains come from, is really from energy efficiency. It's not really from a new form of energy. It's really energy efficiency. And bringing capital to energy efficiency benefits accelerates the improvement. So if you think about the winglets on a Boeing, for instance, um, they save a lot of fuel. You multiply that by all the Boeing planes out there. It's a really big number. You could say, oh, Boeing's a terrible defense company. We won't invest in it. But you could also say, hey, this is the most efficient way of moving people and goods, quickly, in the world. And improving it by another 5% by making a small little nub that's only 3 feet high that sits on the edge of a wing. That's a really tangible energy efficiency investment. And it's interesting also because it resembles many of the companies we see, in that the person who developed it actually worked at Boeing, couldn't convince management to work on it, left the firm, built it on his own, sold it. Eventually, Boeing saw that it did work and bought it, from an independent company. But there are a lot of these companies that are founded by people who see energy efficiency opportunities, not to create a whole new universe, but to improve, the actual physical world we're all living in. And so, but yeah, best of class means we live in that world. We can't imagine that there are computers without metals, that there are data centers without energy,
Yeah, I like that.
or for that matter, that solar or wind exist, without relatively toxic metals that go into them.
So give me the 1 minute version of how do you pronounce it?
Sustana. I
Sustana
pronounce it
Cooling
Sustana.
Partners. Sustana. So
Sure.
why cooling? Why now? Why a dedicated fund and not a
Sure.
generalist climate fund?
Yeah, no, there are hundreds of generalist climate funds. I mean, I would say cooling is the climate adaptation that's most important for humans surviving on Earth, right? That is why we're able to live in hot places uh, like the certain parts of India and certain parts of the United States. That is why our food is safe. That is why our data centers can manage 1,000-watt chips, is because of innovative cooling solutions. So there's an explosion of demand, and the only way that everything keeps working is if we build better tools to manage that. The there's an there's a very interesting challenge, is that the old ways of cooling, principally cooling air, aren't really adequate. And so there's a lot of innovation around the side. So not just within the industry, within the aerospace industry, within the buildings industry, within lots of different industries. And so we want to take advantage of those innovations, and we see a very interesting opportunity to sort of crystallize the benefits of future energy efficiency by investing in the technologies that allow it to happen. And so that's sort of I'm also a sort of growth at a reasonable price investor. So that's a way that you can get the benefits of the exponential growth coming from higher wealth in the developing world, greater middle class, explosion of cooling demand, and also allow grids to survive. And so it solves a lot of very practical problems. And the way these technologies globalize is by getting bought by large companies. And so so the investment thesis is really pretty simple. The world doesn't have much choice other than to adopt best of class cooling technologies, thermal management technologies, in order to reconcile growth with the population that we have. So this, to me, it's a compelling impact thesis, and it's one which has an exit.
So you've got over 100 companies in your pipeline, right? So can you give me the
Yeah,
shape of it? Like what categories, what stages, what geographies?
sure. The geographies are large, I would say it's largely North America, Asia, and Europe. There's a smattering from Latin America and, principally Mexico and Brazil, and then a smattering from Africa. Actually, in Africa, there are a lot of what I would call cooling service companies that are very interesting. That'll be the early adopters of a lot of energy efficient technology. So, and then within the geographies, there's, I would say, safely 30% of the companies are focused on buildings. I would say safely 25 are focused on food. Say another 20 are focused on grid and electronics. Probably another, I would say, are technologies that can fit into multiple verticals, that can be applied into multiple verticals, but there has to be application engineering, and in many cases they need finance. When I contrast it with solar, if you look at just the energy parts of solar without the tax benefits, you're looking at a 10-year payback in a lot of cases. With energy efficient cooling, we see 4-year paybacks all the time. And so 4-year simple paybacks, say 5 years with the cost of capital. So that's really interesting. So it's more than twice as fast. So that tells me there's an opportunity to bring modern finance into cooling and to accelerate the introduction of some of these technologies. But so there's a sort of that finance opportunity, which is to the side of the technologies. And then within it, there's a lot of, there's innovation in materials for reflecting heat back to space, taking advantage of knowledge of material science. There's, I'd call it engineering technologies for improving the efficiency of cooling. There's a lot of people who are working on the problem of humidity. Almost half the energy that's used to cool is actually used to take humidity out of the air. It was originally developed actually to help printers, because the humidity makes it hard to print books and papers because the ink runs. So there are a lot of really interesting companies. There's one called Helix Earth that I like, that is based in Houston, which took some technology that someone developed for NASA to make sure that humidity doesn't build up in satellites, and is applying it to the problem of removing humidity to reduce the load on air conditioning on Earth. And that's a really big, we spend a tremendous amount of energy on that, and we overcool buildings. That's why buildings are sometimes overcooled in the summer, is to take that humidity out. So there's
Uh,
a lot of that.
John, just to keep moving. Are you allowed to talk about the LOIs, or is that more?
No, we can't. Yeah,
Okay,
in the
let's
U,
keep
we're
that
not. We
aside
can't
then.
talk about
Can,
LOIs
can
in
you
this
talk
room. I can.
generally? Can you talk generally about who's the LP this fund is built for? Like, what does
Sure.
the right anchor look like? Check size? I don't know. Sophistication, conviction.
Sure. So, I mean, this is a first of class fund. In some ways, it's like the early best of class funds. Who is the first investor? And so I would say the first investor is going to be an investor that's potentially a multifamily office or a tech founder who's comfortable with making technology bets themselves and who understands uh, that heat is energy and that there's value to be had here. It, it probably won't be a passive investor who only buys funds that are over $1 billion. It's a first fund of type. Um, we're looking for check sizes in the 10 to 20 million area for the first investor. In order to anchor it, we have some smaller commitments from tech, largely from founders. Um, we're finding that's where we're getting a lot of receptivity because dealing with thermal stress is something that a lot of founders deal with in whatever industry they're in. Um, so I'm guessing it's going to be an energy or tech adjacent investor who may be doing it through through a personal account, through a foundation, through a family office, or through a company. We've talked with some corporate venture companies, and so we'll see.
So AI. Okay, that's great. So AI data center cooling
Yeah,
is getting all the airtime, right? So
yeah.
direct to chip, immersion, CDUs. How much of your fund is that versus cold chain, like real estate, food? Like, where's the actual alpha?
I would say it's so. Data centers are getting all the oxygen in the media, but food uses more energy and is also growing really fast. And so I would say that the I would say that we'll probably end up with both, you know, with probably more rapid exits in the AI adjacent space. However, these are not, software companies claiming energy savings are not new. They had them long before, AI was a buzzword. Um, and so many of the companies, so for instance, one of the companies that we're um, bringing to the U.S. and to the Department of Energy, among others, is a company that was started as a real estate company. Skyscrapers are usually cooled with hydronic systems, uh, and their technology can be adapted for data centers. So they developed the technology for a real estate market, but the technology can be adapted for data centers. So it's really, it's not a pure. I don't have a. It's not a pure answer. Like only the companies in the Bay Area with Anthropic clients have solutions. So as another example, I worked on a data center. This is now 10 years ago, but I worked on a data center power plant integration, very similar to what Meta did in Louisiana with 200 megawatt power plant combined with data center, hyperscale data center. So, that integration brought uh, some construction innovation, some fan innovation, water movement. There was a lot of innovation from firms that were not technically in the cooling business. And so I think that's one of the things that's interesting about thermal solutions is there's no silver bullet. It's really gold buckshot.
Emerging markets cooling, right? So
Yeah,
half of what food spoiling before it hits a plate, 2 billion people
sure.
without AC. So that's more like a charity narrative for most people. You're treating it as a venture return. So how do those two things reconcile?
Well, let me suggest that the prevailing wisdom may be wrong here, and so I'll just talk about. I'll give you a practical example. So in India, temperatures are quite high in Mumbai, where one of our advisors has been involved with a firm called Circle Life, and Circle Life offers essentially a subscription model for getting 5-star energy efficient cooling. Well, people don't buy 5-star energy efficient cooling in California because it's too expensive. And they've developed a model which is allowing small businesses to get the most energy efficient cooling that's available in the country for small business commercial. And that business is quite profitable, and the fortunes will be made selling different types of cooling, you know, to in India. Uh, they're not dealing with food cooling right now, just space cooling. But someone, I'm sure someone will do something like that. When you talk about food cooling, I mean, there is a narrative that it's charity work, donations. But when you look at the history of sort of donations giving food to people, they've often destroyed the markets in a lot of places. And that's one of the critiques that people have for the aid community, is it doesn't make sense to be a farmer and sell your food if USAID comes in and donates competitive food for free. There's less demand for your product. So, you know, I'm I'm from the school of thought that there's fortunes to be made in that. Another company that I'll mention, which is which has grown from over the last 15 years on the back largely of rural Indian farmers, people who you may think of as poor needing charity, but they've been selling, large, some finance, but largely cash basis, solar refrigerators and solar driven irrigation systems. And they're now in their 15th year, and they're growing, and they have customers in other countries now, not just India. And so it turns out they're providing a service that the grid isn't providing. They're providing reliable refrigeration for foodstuffs, and that allows storage, that allows people to participate in markets. That's EcoZen Solutions. They also have, build they I shouldn't say obviously, they they consider themselves a deep tech company, not a charity company. They also have pretty elaborate software that they've developed to guide the use of their platforms. And so I think it's sort of a mistake for people to think about the developing world as charity. I mean, the other way of looking at it is, you know, many European countries, the share of wealth that European countries have, for instance, has been going down, as the share that developing countries have has been going up. And so, I expect that pattern to continue, and
I
we'll take advantage of it. We have a lot of interesting we have a lot of deal flow from those
mhm.
countries because the World Bank has a private sector arm, IFC. They had a program which they've discontinued, which tested technologies. So we benefited from that.
Actually, that leads me to my next question, right? So blended capital, IFC, you mentioned
Yeah.
ADB, UN agencies, sounds clean on paper. In practice, it's slow and
Mhm.
ugly. How are you actually structuring around that?
First of all, I agree with what you're saying. I want to just tell you, I thought it would be easier to structure. I mean, I'm a believer that you develop custom financial structures for whoever your participants are. Those organizations say they care about these things. I have taken the time to go to 2 Montreal Protocol meetings and one COP. I have not been impressed with their capacity to move capital forward. We proposed a blended finance structure based on some other structures that they've done for non-cooling things. And I would say the hope is that some of them will come, one or more of them will come through. Not necessarily the World Bank, and maybe one of the regional banks. In the past, Asian Development Bank has been, I would say, a little faster to do multi-site solar and projects with the private sector. There's a real bias towards working with governments. Innovation doesn't come from governments usually in terms of technology. So I would say it's challenging, but at least in the United States, I can share that the U.S. DFC is interested in potentially participating and supporting what we're doing in eligible countries. We can't invest in Iran or Russia, but if it's a country that the U.S. is at peace with, I think they want to help. And I would say they've received a bad rap in the press, but I think they'll probably move before some of the European countries that are largely pushing sort of whatever's being sold in Europe. They're pushing, and so for instance, there are a lot of solar coolers that have been donated to Africa that are not working well. They're oftentimes they're oversized for the needs, and that's but anyway, structured finance is complicated, even if you're just doing it in one country. But I think that we also have the benefit of a crack legal team. We have the opportunity to work with HSBC, which can hedge currencies all over the world. And so I think we're aware of the risks of currency movements. And that's actually one of the risks that these companies have, because they're getting parts from all over the world. And so helping them with their, not only giving them money to grow, but helping them with dealing with their working capital needs and their currency issues is part of what I think a specialist fund can do.
Interesting. So what kind of founder are you cutting checks to? Can you give me an archetype, not just a list of attributes?
I'll give you an archetype. Would be, these are founders that have worked for large organizations. Generally, they're largely not kids right out of school. I would say they're somewhat different than a lot of the sort of solar wind founders who've done a lot of CAD modeling and have built prototypes. And that if I were to contrast it with sort of the classic California clean tech founder innovator PhD, I would say that generally they're people who've worked in industrial or private sector companies, and are trying to solve a problem that they observed, and they're in most cases they already have companies they all have revenue, they all have products. They're not really de novo. They're really not. They're really, if they were in the U.S. or Canada, they'd be A or B rounds. If they're outside of the U.S., there's less capital markets, not as well developed, and so they're typically further along. Actually, in the U.S. we have a lot of companies that have been, that have developed their tech either for the space program or for something else, and they realize energy prices are high and it makes sense to spend some time on Earth.
After hydrogenics, I spent 8 years working for a company called Quanser. It was founded by Dr. Jacob Abkarian, who spent
Uh-huh.
many years on the Canada Space Arm.
Oh, really? So
Yeah, and then
you're our founder. It's crazy. I'm just describing.
yeah, and it takes me back. But no, I was in robotics. This is prior 2013.
Well,
Hey,
there are robotic
help me.
solutions, by the way. There are robotic solutions in this. So, for instance, one of the companies, they make an
Hmm,
interesting composite that can enable more power to go through wires. Well, how do you wrap wires? Well, if you're in California, you don't hire people. You build a robot, right? And so,
right. Yeah.
anyway.
I'm big into robotics. So hey, help me land the plane here, Jonathan. The 10-year ask, right? So if Sistana does what you think it can, what does the world look like, and what does the fund look like?
Okay, first of all, we won't be on a fund one. We'll be on a fund three in 10 years because we won't be
Nice.
just helping these folks get going. We'll be helping them scale. We'll follow the glide path of Angelino Group, could be an example of a firm that we would follow in the sense of scaling up. What the world will look like, the grid won't break down. We really will be able to accommodate a lot of this AI growth. We won't predict who will win, but we'll be in that layer underneath it that a lot of these companies will 10 years they'll be part of global companies. They will go through the exit cycle like Cool It, which KKR bought, very savvy investor, and which was sold to Ecolab for over $1 billion, about 2 months ago. And that will be true for a lot of our companies will follow that exact same glide path. The other thing is, instead of looking at a world where we think that the developed world is just the 2 billion people in OECD countries, we're going to realize that the standard of living of the next 4 billion that are living in what we're calling emerging markets may even be higher. One of the founders who's in Malaysia was explaining to me, how that he and his wife get massages twice a week as part of their lifestyle. And so we're not going to be this sort of division of the world into haves and have-nots is going to be more variegated, and this is going to play a role in bringing that higher level lifestyle, all over the world. The other thing that will happen is we'll realize that we are adapting to climate change. It isn't that cataclysmic. We really will develop, good applications to adapt, and hopefully we'll have a less combative, public discourse about adapting to climate, and it'll be more about adapting than about sort of what's your theology of climate. And so I think it'll be a positive world, and we'll play a part both in scaling up some of these very interesting companies, also in helping climate investors who've been sold a lot of sort of a bill of goods for whatever the politicians in 3 or 4 countries that have led the thing. We will actually direct their capital to firms that will really make a difference. They may, and I think that will be a benefit. They will get good returns. Our best of class, funds were, the sole sustainability manager in the U.S. that beat CalSTR's benchmark. So, I mean, I really think that if you're pragmatic, you can make money doing, climate investing. And I think this will be an example of it. And maybe we will even find ourselves, doing, I look at the large private equity firms and I see that Blackstone bought Emerson. which is a source of recurring dividends that is very good for private equity firms to have. Emerson's last new products and new technology director joined as an advisor to Sistana. So I wouldn't be surprised if we end up playing a role, through financing of doing more private equity, less venture things in 10 years.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Jonathan. Yeah, sorry, were you saying something at the end there?
No. I'm very excited about it. I think,
yeah,
I don't see there's a way. I mean, I don't think there's a way for the world to reconcile everything without improving how we manage heat. And I think this is very exciting. And so
cool. This is an area that I'm super interested in, and I'm really happy that there's people like you out there that's solving this major problem, so my kids can grow up in a more
you're from the crew. I didn't realize it. I didn't realize you were also one of
and I also started India's first Bitcoin exchange in 2013. So I lived in India. Definitely know what you mean about having a higher standard of living there. Here, I've got to do everything myself. It's definitely not as easy. So
you multiply that out, but I think that's a piece of the narrative in Canada and the US that is a little bit different than, I think in 5 years, it'll be clear that we're in a different multipolar world, and it won't, I think more people will have that appreciation, and investors that invest judiciously in emerging markets will, we will have a head start over people chasing basis points or just chasing the next ChatGPT wrapper. We really will add value.
Jonathan, my next guest is here. I'll catch up with you on the next time. On the next one, we'll take care.
Very nice talking with you again, Sonny. Sorry.
Yeah. Bye-bye.
Bye.